Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. Today is Wednesday. It is May the 8th, and I wanted to just welcome you to our another episode of Farm to Market, where I have the privilege of bringing in a 53-year veteran in the ag industry, Harry Siemens of Siemens Says. In tonight's broadcast, we're going to talk about sustainable agriculture. What does that mean? Is it possible? And I know Harry, with all of his experience, is going to take us back to what it used to mean that you could survive as a farmer. How is it today? The regulations that are affecting us. Let's get into that right now. And I'm looking forward to doing this show. Stay tuned and we'll get started right now. Well, my name is Karl Krebs. I'm the host of Things That Matter, and we're going to talk about farm to market, the ag industry, certainly something that matters. And it was my intention when I asked Harry Siemens, who's going to join me in a moment on stage here, to talk about the ag industry. It was my intention to understand, why is it that I'm paying more for my groceries in store? What is it that is affecting that? And I apologize for this lighting. I look like I'm translucent right now because the sun has decided to bless me through my office window in a new way. But it's not going to affect us. We're going to get started here. You know, we know that our producers are critical to providing one of the three necessary elements that we all require. We all require clothing, we require shelter, and we require food. Of the three, we're going to talk about the food aspect. And I became so curious, what is it that's driving the prices in the market? Is it artificial? Is it someone just playing, with the keystrokes and changing prices? You know, I don't have all the answers, but that's why I asked Harry Siemens to come on this program, because with his experience of 53 years in the ag industry, I don't know anybody more at the switches than Harry. Welcome to the show, Harry, again. How are you, my friend?
You know what, doing really well. And we just to begin on a really positive note, we probably have a better spring since the last 4 or 5 years as far as moisture is concerned in Manitoba and across Western Canada. There are some people actually saying, I wish it would stop raining. Well, of course, it looks like the weather patterns have now changed and it will stop. But we did get some seeding in. But at the same time, this year, we were really dry, and there are still parts where the subsoil moisture isn't what we'd like it to be. But we never lose a crop in May. We don't lose a crop in June. We always need the rains here in Manitoba and Western Canada. So I just wanted to say that, you know what, we've got great conditions, but that doesn't mean that they're going to turn out that way. And that's why we always have to do everything we can. And we want to talk about sustainable agriculture, and I'll let you, ask some questions.
Well, that is we talk about that, and I think in some ways there's a misconception out there. What does that mean? And I think, at the core of it, our producers have to practice sustainable agriculture, to be able to carry on. So how about you start us off with a good definition of sustainable agriculture in the way that, we need to understand it?
Sustainable agriculture basically has to deal with how we look after the soil, we look after the environment, we look after the animals, we look after the crops, and we look after the farmer himself. But when we put all of those things together, we have to make sure that in order to be sustainable, the farmer has to make money, not just eke out a living the way it used to be considered as far as sustainable agriculture. But you got it, and if all of those things work well, communities in rural Canada or in the United States do far better when the farmer is doing well. But let me just say one other thing. I remember years ago, right early on in my career, I was at a university meeting of some kind. And one of the professors came to me and I did the interview, and we talked about sustainable agriculture. And that's where he told me, he says, Harry, we have far too much concern about sustainable agriculture. And at that time, we didn't know what it really meant. He simply said, it simply seems like it's a way of just eking out a living. And that's totally changed from at that point. And then the other thing, I remember doing a television show, a coffee chat in Morris, Manitoba, where one of the farmers said, you know, I made the comment, you know, we can grow this particular wheat variety much cheaper on the prairies. And he came back to me, he says, Harry, I'm sick and tired of people telling me we are the cheapest place where you can grow this particular crop. And so that was sustainable agriculture. Things have really changed when technology moved in, and we've got, you know, the gene editing, and we have, you know, fertilizer, crop protection products, mapping, all that kind of stuff has really taken sustainable agriculture up to the next level. But the one thing we also can never forget, we need to look after the soil. There was a time early on when some of the bigger farmers got charged, or not charged, but people would accuse them of the fact that they're just raping the soil. Well, that's not the case, you know, and so we have to make sure we look after the soil. If we don't have a good soil with a good balance of stuff in it, then we won't have the crops that the farmers need to make money, and we need to feed the world. The other thing, in order for us to be sustainable, we export anywhere from 60 to 90% of everything produced on the prairies is exported to other countries who need our food.
Yeah, and in previous episodes, we talked about some changing dynamics, such as the COOL program. You know, the country of origin labeling is going to certainly, you know, affect the hog industry and every other industry if it's implemented. So we know things are changing. There's a lot of government oversight. There's perhaps too much of it. I remember in 2016 when Donald Trump, you know, was elected, and he committed to reining in the environmentalists. And insofar as any new policies, any new legislation that was going to be tabled had to be considered, where if you want to bring one on, you have to take two off. So clearly, you know, the United States and Canada, we tend to mirror each other that way. In your opinion, and I'm asking a loaded question because I know the answer, the producer is capable of looking after his land, because in the word of sustainable, he has the most to lose and the most to gain if he is not being diligent in maintaining that environment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And at this point, you know, people will say, well, yeah, the farmer isn't looking after it. You know, there were some farmers, you know, smaller farmers way back when, that did everything they could, but they just didn't know enough. They didn't have enough tools to look after that soil the way it was supposed to be looked after. But absolutely, we talk about manure management. We talk about fertilizer management. We talk about weed control and all those kinds of things, tillage. You know, I've mentioned it on this show, and I'm going to say it again. As good a farmer as my father was, you know, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, early 70s, we were plowing, we were tilling so many times. I bet, you know, and we didn't stop until the snow flew. And once the snow flew, then we'd put the equipment away. So we would sometimes, a field would get passed over with tillage equipment of some kind 5, maybe 6, and as much as 7 times. And so, and that really wasn't good for the soil. When we put the moldboard plow and parked it in the bush, as so many people did, and started to till, and then we started to disc. And then, of course, we went from the discer to the air seeder. Now the soil gets disturbed very often, no more than once in a year. And you know, and that's the key. And I've used the example when on a particular day, I was driving to Steinbach, and it had been snowing and stormy and blustery, and it was warm out there. and it looked like, wow, the roads were going to be good. So I started traveling, and I drive for 10 minutes and there was ice on the road. And then I'd drive for 10 minutes and there would be, the pavement would be dry. So I started to watch on the sides, and then I could see exactly what I'm talking about now. The fields that had good stubble, the fields that caught the snow, the roads were dry and the snow stayed on the field. And those areas where the fields were black, the snow was coming right across the road and melting and making it icy. I shared that with some people that know far more about it than I do. And they told me, you're exactly right. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah. I want to turn our attention to a letter that was released from the Manitoba Pork Council. And it deals with agriculture, of course, as part of the solution. And the opening statement from Mr. Cam Dahl, General Manager of the Manitoba Pork Board, says, "This is not your granddaddy's farm anymore." And I thought that was a really interesting way to introduce it, because the nostalgia of the farm, the little red barn, the hayloft, the old technology, the farmer going down the road with his, 5-ton, tilting box, hauling his grain to the local elevator. That's all given way to the technology and the sophistication that's in our farm. And he identifies that key steps are needed to protect our natural resources while maintaining economic sustainability. So, and this letter is interesting because its focus is largely, it starts off with the algae problem in Lake Winnipeg. And I thought, well, now isn't that a regional problem? But he goes on to explain about the nutrients and so forth. And eventually he brings into account the amount of the finger pointing, I think, that's gone on in terms of leaching and what's going into our lakes and affecting it. This is a part of today's farming.
It's interesting. And I like the way he also talked about how, I have done interviews with manure applicators. Like, this isn't for just your average farmer anymore. First of all, they have lagoons or some kind of a manure storage. And then the government is very strictly controlled when they can apply it. We used to have a stone boat. You'd load it up in the winter time, and then you'd take it out there either with a horse or a tractor, and you just toss it over. You toss it on the snow, and sure enough, in spring, what happens? It would run off, and the soil would benefit very little. Now you have to have certain times. You can't do it after sundown. You can't do it before the sun is up. Certain times of the year, I think in fall. Now in spring, I'm not even sure what the date is where they can start to spread the manure. But most of it goes on during the fall after the harvest, of course. But it's so with technology has it down so packed that they apply it under the soil, and it gets sliced in under the soil, and the soil is the applicator, the opener of the soil, closes it off. And so where it used to really smell when somebody would apply the manure, right? Yeah. And now, you know what? Sure, I don't want to be held accountable for the fact that it doesn't smell. It does. Obviously, there's a time when it still does. But at the same time, it's covered up, and it's going into that soil. And, a lot of farmers used to say, I wish I could get some hog manure, that we could get the earthworms back into the fields, And again, I don't want to, put down the fertilizer applicators and so forth, but that's the key. We ship 3 million weanlings of weanling pigs to the Midwest United States, Iowa, and those Missouri. Why? They raise pigs there, not so much for the meat. Yes, the meat goes to the packer and all that, but at the same time, they want the manure for their fields, because manure costs are so high and the hog manure is so much better for the fields that's why so many of our weanlings are going south.
Okay, so on that note, and this letter points out that before farmers apply manure, again, a naturally occurring substance in this world, they're required to file manure management plans with the provincial government. And as you said, over 90% of the hog manure in Manitoba is injected below the soil surface and incorporated into soil immediately. We've known forever that this is a healthy, natural a fertilizer.
Totally.
So is it possible? And the letter goes on to say that he's asking for a task force to be struck where all entities who have a vested interest, and there's a lot of people in there that he mentions, come together in a reasonable understanding. And as he said, to stop the finger pointing that's been going on. Is it possible when we look at the hog industry, which has had its tough days, as regulators, and I mean, I'm going to ask you to speak to the era of Gary Dewar and how that hog industry was almost decimated or was on the edge of it. Is it possible they've got the wrong information, that this leaching of what they think is hog manure going into the lakes isn't actually the problem? Because they talk about the algae problem in Lake Winnipeg.
Well, I'm no scientist, but at the same time, I do want to say that there's a certain small percentage of the society, the animal activists, they would love to stop hog production for various reasons. Number one, to stop it. Number two, to create more inefficiencies in farming. And so this particular letter from Cam Dahl, and it's the Manitoba Pork Council, which represents all hog producers in Manitoba. And he's put out this letter. He's simply, I believe, and I haven't specifically talked to him about it, I want to, that it's a proactive, going, to make sure that they can get these people together and we can deal with those issues. And then maybe we can show people that, exactly as you said, it really may not be coming from hog manure after all. Surprise, surprise. Because, I remember a meeting years ago where they were going to put up a barn near the border southwest of Morton. And there was a lady at the meeting, and she was there from Walhalla. And she stood up and she says, you know what? This hog manure that you guys are going to produce here, it's going to come to our country, and it's going to pollute our waterways. Well, it really, in the way she was putting it, it was almost like hog manure had to run uphill, and so we had a lot of those kinds of debates, and that's the other thing that Manitoba Pork Council has done in order to, they're dealing with RMs, they're dealing with people, and so to take away the fear that, and the other thing is, and sure enough, the industry didn't do all things right. But we have an area east of the river, Steinbach, and that whole area, they have as many hog barns as they probably ever should have. But we have less space on this side of the river. You go west, and where there's all kinds of areas, there's no waterways, nothing, and so there isn't even that threat. So we have to do the things right.
Yeah, this letter goes on to talk about, the advances in technology, global position, GPS technology being used, ultrasound speed sensors, radar to ensure that the manure is applied the right place, right time, right rate. So it seems, again, that the farmer, who might be, in this case, falsely accused, is doing more now, as you said, than what was previously done. Maybe perhaps exceeding what is reasonable and normal. But in what we're talking about here on this farm to market, we're trying to understand, if you as a consumer are going to the market and you're complaining and concerned about the price you're paying, bear in mind the producer has to in some way pass on these additional costs. This technology doesn't come for free. And so we look at that and we say, are we over technologized? Are we overly concerned? Has the pendulum swung from what you said about days of your father too far to the left?
I don't think so. I think at this point, it's amazing what we can do. So just to make sure that we understand, even with fertilizers, you take a field and the mapping and the yields from the year before. So next year you're putting on fertilizer. Those areas of the fields that didn't have a very good crop didn't use all the fertilizer. So you don't put on as much. It's done automatically with technology. you're putting on exactly what your field needs. And of course, that includes soil testing. You want to
Right.
make sure there was
They know this because of the soil samples they're constantly taking.
totally. So you put all of that into the technology and computer and whatever else you want to call it, and then from there you move forward and do it exactly right. You know why? The other thing is, why would a farmer want to put extra fertilizer on that doesn't do him any good, especially with today's cost? The other thing that technology does, you put an air seeder. There was a time when you looked over and you probably you didn't want to leave any strips where there was nothing seeded, right? So you would double. You would always overlap. Well, now with the GPS, you go exactly accordingly as to where that edge was where you finished off the last round.
Yeah. So, he goes on to say that they intend to be part of the solution in taking action beyond the farm. Farmers are prepared to do this and ready to participate in a broad effort to develop the solutions to the challenges. And this is in particular facing Lake Winnipeg. And he's asking for a Lake Winnipeg task group. So it seems that, again, the producer, and in this case, the hog producers, are wanting to be ahead of the curve here. They want to be ahead of it and say, we want to be a part of it as much as everybody wants to see Lake Winnipeg cleaned up. And you know what? In all these matters, Harry, as we've observed over the years, this is a matter of balance. We have to strike a balance between what we need to have sustainable agriculture and pull back from crossing the line in doing our environment undue harm.
You're absolutely right. You have the person sitting way over here and you have the person sitting way over on the other side. And so we've got to bring them together, because the person way over here, he wants to destroy production agriculture. They don't want to, they want to save the planet, right? So if agriculture is part of destroying the planet, then we have to make sure we produce less. But at the same time, the fellow way over here, he's saying, hey, look at my technology. Now, Camdall, the Manitoba Pork Council, and all the producers, they're saying just exactly what you said. Let's be part of the solution. And I really take my hat off to Cam and the people that he works with, because they've done an amazing job with all kinds of things that are going on in agriculture. And the thing to remember, when we talk about hog producers, we're talking about grain producers. We're talking about corn producers, feed producers, because without those feed producers, corn and so forth, those pigs can't survive.
It's all related. All of our industries, this 3 degrees of separation, all of the industries themselves, all the so-called producers are doing business with each other at some point. They're all connected. So as you said in that simple example, all of them require, that they speak to each other and work together. And for those of you that don't know it, Lake Winnipeg is Canada's 6th largest lake and 10th largest in the world. So when they are keying in on this Lake Winnipeg, it might seem a little narrow focus, but this is an incredible resource of fresh water that we have. And of course, Lake Winnipeg feeds so many tributaries out of it. It has effects all the way down to where we are here in southern Manitoba. So as we said at the beginning, how do we bring this home we want to make it relevant to the people watching? Perhaps you're not a producer and you're a guy like me. I just wanted to know what's going on with food prices. How is this feeding itself back? Everything that from the point of sale in the store feeds back to the producer, who at some point put the seed in the ground, to the producer who has weanlings that he raises and those get harvested for our benefit, to the cattle industry, to all the chickens. Everything feeds its way back. So we want to understand that there's a lot of pressure here on producers. They have to be compliant, but they have to have sustainable measures that I guess put it in a summary form, if you could, what a producer goes through in his mind as he tries to balance this.
Well, number one, a producer for the most part is a price taker. You just can't go out there and sell your product and say, hey, unless it's in short supply, the price goes up. But at the same time, they are price takers. And the costs, yes, the costs have gone up astronomically. From when I was farming in the 60s at $40, $50 an acre to $700, $800 an acre just to put in a crop. You ask, what's the farmer thinking? And so that has to be covered. And so, yes, some farmers make good money and great money, but at the same time, between the farmer's gate and the grocery store, there are so many people in between. And not only that, the government regulations add a lot of costs to the price of food. And so we have carbon tax, we have sales tax, we have all kinds of taxes, bag taxes, you name it.
Yeah.
And so but we also have big grocery companies that almost in Canada have a monopoly. And so they can kind of do with that price what they really want. I'm not blaming them for everything, but at the same time, the farmer is the price taker. The grocery manager sets the price. And so in between, you and I have to try and make it work in our budget that we can actually go and buy the healthy food. And that's one other thing I want to mention, that in the farmer in North America, whether it's the United States, whether it's Manitoba, Alberta, Ontario, we produce the healthiest and the most cost-effective food, and at the same time, it's safe because we have great regulatory bodies in the image of Canadian Food Inspection Agency, that our food is about as safe can be, and it's healthy.
Yeah. I just in the last few minutes here that we have, we've talked a lot about government, and there's some really good oversight. But I'm going back in my mind to President Ronald Reagan, who really came out swinging at the government, saying, the government, the biggest joke is if the government shows up and says, we're from the government, we're here to help. That became a tagline of his and a punchline for many of his years as president. But he single-handedly, as a president, said that the government has been the problem in many different ways. I mean, do we have too much government involvement in the industries that, as you said, the producer is well aware of the environment he's in and the need to be sustainable and the need to protect it and so forth? But do we have too much regulation in that? Is it necessary to maybe pull back on some of that and revisit it at least, because these regulations continue to come on? I'm not aware of any that come off, just new ones that come on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Regulations at every step of the way. They add costs no matter what. And we have farm organizations across Canada. I know more in Western Canada. These farm organizations, and one is the Wheat Growers Association, that has really worked hard at dealing with government. Like every farm organization, the corn growers, the canola growers, the hog producers, they all have national associations with representatives working on government. But we've had to be careful that we don't get overstepped by what the government is telling you, and so we have people telling farmers how to farm that have no idea of what farming is all about. You know what?
That's where I was going with that statement, Harry. I operate in the trucking industry. I've been in that business long enough to understand that there are people who sit in offices somewhere that are trying to tell us how to drive our trucks and everything, and the technology. I was just amazed to look at that the other day with our company and see how this camera in my truck is really regulating everything that we're doing. And so we have this oversight. And I guess as the hog producers, for example, and Mr. Cam Dahl would be one of those, there's a need to push back. There has to be points where we push back on the regulations so that we have this sustainable agriculture. Because he's a price taker, my friend. As you said, the price taker is not the price maker. We have grocery stores that control, monopolize. You take Sobeys, Safeway, and the superstore. You got it all. You got more than 60% of the entire groceries in this country. They're the price makers in some ways. If you don't sell it to us, we'll just buy it from another country.
You're absolutely right. And again, to wrap up this show, that we're coming to an end, Karl, I don't want, I love it. You're a truck driver, but I don't want to drive truck. I love it when a farmer farms, but I was always happy when I went to a dairy farm and I could leave and they would stay and milk the cows. And so, yes, sustainable agriculture, to all of our viewers, is basically making sure that we have the best food possible at the right price, and make sure that it's available to everybody that is absolutely possible. And you know what? I continue to be an advocate of the farmer. I have been 53 years. I will continue to do so as long as God gives me the wherewithal and the breath. That Siemens Says, somewhere, sometime, somehow, my friends. I will see you again.
Love it. Thanks for joining again. I hope I'm looking forward to next week's show already. Thank you, Harry. Well, you know what? Yeah, safe and sustainable agriculture. That's the goal. So as you go to the superstores in this country, as you go to your grocery store, wherever that is, and you're wondering, why are these prices still going up? Why am I paying so much more? This is where we have this. This is why I decided to get out of my comfort zone. I'm not a farmer's kid. I didn't grow up on a farm like my friend Harry did, but I'm trying to understand from the consumer point, what is happening to our food prices? And this is where we want to give you the truth. We want to give you the straight goods, and hopefully you understand what's going on in the background. So for today, as talking about sustainable agriculture and food, yeah, that's certainly something that matters. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week. Same time, same channel.